Okay, I think that's over to me, is it, Neil? Hello, everyone. It's lovely to have you in the space. Hope you can see and hear me okay. My name is Michael. I use he, they pronouns. I'm currently in Barcelona. And for anyone who needs a visual description, I'm a white male presenting in my 30s, stubble, brown, well, actually, yeah, brown stubble with a blonde quiff. And behind me, there's a white wall and a mirror. For those who don't know me, I'm the founder of We Create Space. We're a community-led platform, consultancy, and collective, and we're on a mission to improve the lives of LGBT plus people and other underrepresented groups of professionals around the world. And we do this by creating space like this one for learning, for connection, and growth. And before we get started today, I've just got a little video to show you, which let me just run through this actually. Yeah. So we've got some, well, welcome and introductions, done that. Today we're joined by Santo, who is going to be delivering the majority of today's session. I'll be supporting by asking questions and generally just prodding, being annoying, and maybe asking them to go into a bit more detail. There's some space for Q&A and then some takeaways as well. So just a little video explaining a bit more about who we are. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Michael, and I'm the founder of We Create Space. We Create Space has evolved into this global community, movement, and learning platform with now over 30,000 international members. Our DEI consultancy services more than 180 corporate clients, and we've trained over 100,000 employees on topics relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our growing collective of over 300 speakers support our mission of improving the lives of LGBTQ+ people and other underrepresented groups of professionals around the world. And as a social enterprise, we continuously invest our profits back into the communities we serve. We connect thousands of LGBTQ+ people and allies with free tools, knowledge, and a support network for personal growth, leadership development, allyship, and self-care. We do that through events, experiences, content and research, resources, and consultative work. So whether in a corporate environment, on our online learning platform, or in a community setting, we aim to create space for learning, connection, and growth. Join us as we build a brighter, more inclusive, and sustainable queer future.
Thanks. Hard to follow such an amazing performance, isn't it, really? Hi, everyone. If you just joined us again, welcome. Some ways that you can get involved. If you're not aware already, you can attend our free events like the one that you're doing today. Thank you again for being here. You can share our social posts. You can amplify all the speakers and the projects that we work with, or you could introduce us to your employer as well or colleagues. So if it is your first time in this space, do reach out to me or someone from the team in the chat. You can get more information. And for those that are returning, it's great to see you again. I'm really looking forward to this rich and insightful discussion. So on the menu today, we have the topic of, oh, sorry, am I jumping around a bit? Yeah, so this is part of a Queer Living webinar series that we've been doing since September, tackling different subjects and topics within the community, really looking at how they intersect with our queerness. So we're on this one today, which is around queerness and nature. There's still one more to come in December, looking at chosen families. And so today's session will be moderated by Santo, who's going to introduce themselves in a second. But we really do encourage you to share your thoughts, your questions. Throughout the session, you can use the chat, you can use the Q&A function if you want to share something anonymously. And you can also target your question towards a specific speaker there. So I'm going to stop there and hand over to Santo to introduce themselves and get started. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Michael. Hi, everyone. Lovely to have you all here. My name is Santo. My pronouns are he, they. A little bit about my background is that I studied biomedicine, and then I went into psychology, and then a field called positive psychology, which is essentially the study of the science of what makes life worth living or well-being. And while I was studying, I realized that a lot of the frameworks, understandings of what happiness and well-being is didn't really fit my own experience. And so that's when I started trying to look at other lenses to help us understand well-being in a more inclusive way. And one of those lenses was queer ecology. So today I'm going to be talking a bit about queer ecology, a little bit about my work and my research, particularly in the feeling of awe. And I'm going to bring in Michael every now and then to share experiences. So just to begin, I wanted to talk a little bit about my experiences of connecting with nature. When I was younger, I grew up in quite a conservative small town in Australia in a conservative Italian family. And kind of what was my respite mentally was being able to be by myself out in nature, particularly in the ocean. I'm quite privileged and lucky to have had access to natural spaces in Australia. And I'm thinking of one particular place called Point Addis, which is this beautiful, beautiful place near me. And kind of as you're driving up, there's like these huge eucalyptus trees and these big towering cliffs. And then you walk down these cliffs and you're just confronted with this vast, violent, beautiful ocean. And I just remember, these experiences of being by myself in that ocean, looking up at the cliffs and just feeling the vastness of nature, the power of nature, and how expansive that allowed me to feel. It allowed me to understand that I'm much more expansive than society would have me believe. I'm the ocean, and I'm also the trees, and I'm the colors, and I'm the skies, and I'm the birds. It transcends all these understandings of, of who I am because I have a penis, for example. So those were kind of my earlier experiences with connecting in nature. And to this day, being in nature is such a fundamental part of who I am and my well-being. Nature and its infinite wisdom constantly blurs the lines that we draw. Michael, I'm wondering if you have any similar experiences or kind of what's your experience with connecting with nature?
Yeah, I think from a practical perspective, I mean, COVID really was quite an experience for many of us being perhaps separated from our routines. And I was actually living with my parents in the countryside back where I grew up. And I spent, many years there as a child, and I just don't think I'd fully appreciated it because as a queer person, I really wanted to get out and move to the city, and it was just kind of not where I wanted to be. And then to kind of go back, not only kind of in that situation, but as almost like an adult in my 30s, I actually saw it as a whole different place. But in reality, it was it hadn't really changed that much, And when I, when kind of in the early stages of COVID, I remember I almost like couldn't really do that much, but I was able to get outside, and it was through, I think, connecting more just with nature that I was able to start to feel my creativity coming back. So not necessarily in the exact way that I thought it was, but I actually just started like going out on these long walks and just singing. And it was kind of through that. And I had a dog at that. I got a dog like 2 days before lockdown, which was very lucky. But being able to kind of experience that with an animal as well was kind of a very special kind of experience. And And I think just being that now in my third, I moved to Barcelona specifically to have more access to nature, and just kind of prioritize that in my life, realizing that it just kind of helped ground me during quite kind of hectic periods. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Michael. So, as just a general introduction to queer ecology, there's kind of two different branches or facets we can think about. There's kind of queering our understanding of what nature is, and then there's also queering our understanding of who has access to natural spaces. So in terms of applying a queer lens to nature, we start to understand it in a very different way. We start to understand it as something that's vast, unpredictable, mysterious, complex, richly diverse. As queer people, we're able to find solace in nature, and it's a mirror to our own colors. Nature defines categorization, dissolves binaries, not only gender binaries, but this whole idea of nature and human, this idea that there's a binary or separation. We are nature. We're not separate, but we're part of nature. And then the most important ideas are this idea of diversity and adaptability being important facets of nature. Thank you, Neil. I think first and foremost is challenging this idea of what natural is, because historically natural has been weaponized to exclude queerness. It's not natural, as it were. But in actual fact, nature stands in opposition. So the way we kind of understand and categorize nature dates back to, in the West, dates back to this Swedish botanist called Carl Linnaeus. And in the 18th century, he started to categorize natural elements, different plants, started to put them in boxes, animals, phenomena in nature. But at the time, he applied the societal's understanding of these different binaries, for example. He just placed plants in gender groups of male, female, which was kind of the 18th century Victorian rigid binary perspective. Then came along Darwin, who I'm sure most of us are familiar with in the 19th century. And Darwin proposed this idea of survival of the fittest, the theory of evolution, that the males, as it were, are competitive with each other, and that the females are choosy, and the females will choose the fittest male. So there's this idea of competition. But a lot of scientists nowadays have proven and refuted a lot of these ideas, one of which is Joanne Roughgarden, who I would highly recommend to look up their work. And sort of Joanne Roughgarden's research shows that actually those species or phenomena in nature that instead prioritize cooperation, adaptation, fluidity, working together, are the ones who are more likely to survive. And that it's more about variation and diversity and not just about competition and sex. And of course, Joanne Roughgarden also provided a whole array of queerness and colors in nature. I'll give just two examples. One example is, thank you, Neil, is the clownfish. I love clownfish. I actually saw one for the first time out in nature in the ocean. I think it was last year. I was in rock pools and then I just saw this little orange thing peeking out, and it was this cute little clownfish. So clownfish are born with this organ called an ovestis. And the ovestis has both ovarian parts and testicular parts. Well, what we understand ovarian and testicular parts to be. So to begin with, the testicular part is more dominant as the clownfish grows older. But when the environment signals that there's a need for an ovarian trait, one of these clownfish start to recede their testicular traits and start to develop more their ovarian traits so that the ovarian part of the ovestis starts to take over. So in this case, we can see this is more about adaptation. and there's more of a fluidity in terms of these ovarian and testicular traits. And what's even more interesting is that it's not just a physiobiological shift, it's also a social shift as well. The other testicular clownfish start to treat the ovarian clownfish as an ovarian clownfish at the point that it starts transitioning, not after, but as soon as it starts. And then next example, please. Neil, thank you. Fungi. I think fungi are wonderfully queer because they just challenge everything we understand about nature and being and gender. The example I have here is Schizophyllum commune, which has over 23,000 mating types, 23,000 combinations of chromosomes. Not two, not five, but 23,000. Michael, I'm wondering, is anything coming up for you at the moment or?
Yeah, I'm kind of going back to the clownfish and this idea of, I guess, how it interacts with others. Do you have any kind of other examples of where perhaps there are differences in kind of social interactions, or where kind of appearances perhaps um, change?
So an example that's coming up is, and forgive me because I don't remember which penguins it is, but it is a certain type of penguin. And also the language that I'm using is going to be quite limited. There's this understanding that there's certain penguins that are gay. um, if we're using like our human language and our queer language, and that actual male bonding is very important for this species of penguins, for example. So that's a good example. There are certain types of plants that transition over sort of the depending on what the environment's signaling, transition to either male or female, male or female. And that's kind of the examples that are coming up for me at the moment. But I will paste some more examples either in the chat or follow up later because there's like a whole myriad of beautiful examples in nature. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so this other sort of branch of queer ecology also starts to deconstruct and it deconstructs and places queer connection with nature in a different lens, because historically sort of connection with nature has always been more of a cis heteronormative space. If you think about like rural and outback, if you think about parks that were constructed for families to walk through, etc., they've largely natural spaces have largely excluded queer people and other marginalized populations. So what I'm going to put forward is that nature embraces diverse love and bodies as essential joyous parts of life. I think it's essential that we embrace and we celebrate queer love, queer desire, queerness in all its forms in nature. Queer retreats, gay nude beaches, cruising areas, eco-protests, park parties. These are sort of forms of embodied resistance that are pushing back against colonial heteronormative and consumerist narratives that try to define what is natural. And also it's defying our understanding of nature, of this kind of this divide between us and nature. We are nature, here we are, don't tell us we're not natural. It's not just an acceptance, but an insistence of who we are, of queer bodies, of love, pleasure, and desire. I know this is a personal passion area for you, Michael. Is there anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, I think retreats were just so powerful for me when I was specifically after I'd burnt out and I was looking for healing spaces and really needed to challenge perhaps the behaviors or like the patterns that I was kind of seeing and kind of experiencing. And I think retreats really allow us to to kind of see things from a different perspective for that short period of time. Obviously, it's up to us kind of what we do with that information, but having experienced kind of that almost like overwhelming change of being uh, removed from my current environment or like my usual environment, and then almost kind of having to deal with just not having distractions, but or having like a different kind of distraction. Everything kind of slows down, and you start noticing things that perhaps you didn't before. And that might be external things, or it might be internal elements of either who you are, or just understanding better your like mental health around your thoughts, your beliefs and behaviors. Um, I found a lot of the retreats that I have been on um, to be quite heteronormative in some ways, though, because I think they perhaps were more just appealing to a specific type of person. And so, although one of the biggest benefits of going on retreat is like connecting with people as well and starting to like hear the stories of other people. I found like a lot of the spaces were, yeah, with kind of straight people really. And so there was a lack of, not necessarily lack of compassion, but certainly just a lack of unspoken understanding, which I think queer spaces offer. Um, I think there's probably just a lack of accessibility with a lot of these kind of retreat spaces. They're not necessarily always affordable, or people can't necessarily always travel. So yeah, I think that it's a personal passion, mission of mine to bring more of those spaces to life. And that's certainly something that I'd love to do more with We Create Space as well. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think accessibility is a large one because a lot of the time, um, nature is inaccessible for a lot of people, and queer retreats especially, access to them. And I think your kind of point about slowing down is a beautiful segue to my next point. Thanks, Neil. This this sort of area is where a lot of my research centers. I was talking a lot about kind of the theory of queer ecology, and theory is great, but I am particularly interested in kind of the embodiment of this theory. Okay, so we understand ourselves as connected and relationality to something bigger, and the theory is that we dissolve this binary of human nature. But what does that feel like? What does it mean about our self-concept? And that's where this feeling of awe comes in. Awe means that we need to approach our lives and nature with curiosity. We need to slow down. We need to tune into our senses. We need to see things that we haven't previously seen before in this childlike state of mind. So this feeling of awe is what comes about when we're confronted with vastness, whether that be vastness of beauty, of time, of space, of something we can't immediately understand. And it creates like this physiological response in which we're confused but excited and a little bit fearful. And the result is that we feel smaller, but much more connected to something larger, something bigger than ourselves. And this feeling of awe, the research shows, is important for our well-being, especially for queer people when tending to the high levels of minority stress that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. This feeling of awe calms our minds. It's powerful for self-care and belonging. It helps us feel connected to one another, to nature, to something much bigger. And also, there's a large nerve called the vagus nerve, which is kind of responsible for telling our nervous system that we're safe. It activates this vagus nerve, this feeling of awe, which means our blood pressure is lowered, our cortisol, which is the hormone associated with stress, is lowered, and overall our well-being is improved. I think that awe is a basic biological need, wild awe, and we must try to find it as much as we can in our day-to-day lives. Maybe we can't go out to a national park, but maybe we can go for a walk to Victoria Park along the canal and just slow down and notice the water, notice the rain, notice the colors. Any thoughts, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I use an app called Calm. It's kind of like a headspace kind of thing, and they do some wonderful kind of guided meditations, like walking through the forest meditation. And I mean, sometimes when we need these things the most, we find it, the most difficult to actually slow down to take a breath. And so having someone guide you a bit can be useful initially, especially if you're not kind of used to it. So yeah, just something to try really. Having this voice kind of pointing things out. But you can also just do it in your imagination as well, can't you? It can certainly be a I've been on some wonderful kind of guided meditations with my eyes closed in nature and really kind of listening to the sounds. And uh, yeah, I think even just finding a way to align your breath with some of the sounds that are happening in nature as well can be very powerful. Um, I'm very lucky that I get to go to Costa Rica every year to see my brother, and it's a real. I mean, that is quite one extreme. I think almost like snakes in the shower, that kind of vibe. It's definitely the extreme of being submersed in nature, but it really does. I think give it almost like gives me such a grounding at the start of each year to be able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, what's coming up for me, Michael, as you're talking, is that this study where they had two groups of people. One group were instructed to just walk through nature, walk through a park, and the other group were instructed to take 6 deep breaths. And after those 6 deep breaths, move through the natural space and really tune in to all their senses, to the bird song, as you mentioned, to sensations. And they were told what awe is, and they were instructed to find awe. And this is called an awe walk. So any of us can do this at any time of day, can go out for a walk, take 6 deep breaths, and really tune into our senses and try and find this feeling of awe. The group that did the awe walk and were instructed to find awe had much higher levels of well-being, of happiness, of connection, of pro-sociality, and all these wonderful things as compared to the other group that were just walking purely through nature. So this is like a wonderful thing that we can do from day to day, even if it's 5 to 10 minutes. Thank you, Neil. Can we go to our next point? So I think it's fundamental to talk about Indigenous worldviews and Indigenous voices when talking about nature connection, because we can't have a discussion of nature connection without honoring Indigenous voices, especially because Indigenous knowledge systems have always embraced this complexity, this fluidity, relationality, interconnectedness that we talk about in queer ecology. And these ways of being and thinking existed long before Western frameworks like queer. Queer ecology is a testament to these enduring principles. The next slide, please, Neil. So there's an incredible artist called Emerson Uria, who is an Indigenous trans artist and educator from the Amazon. And her work is sort of performative drag, drawing on Indigenous worldviews, where Uria defines and redefines binaries using a unique blend of performance art, drag, ancient rituals. It's kind of this testament to nature and gender in being fluid and connected, urging us to care for our planet as we care for ourselves. And I just have some images of some stills from some of Uria's work here. Next slide. It's beautiful. I'd really encourage everyone to look up Uria's work. And then a quote to finish, which I saw actually this morning, is maybe the clouds and the trees and the flowers love looking at you too. Here is this idea that we observe nature, but actually nature is observing our beauty as well.
Love that. Coming back to, thank you so much, Santo. I'm going to come back to some of the previous points because I've thought of some questions now. Now that I've had some time to see the presentation. Coming back to this idea of like almost artivism or activism and conservation and the role that I guess queer leadership can play in addressing environmental challenges or advocating for conservation. What kind of role do you see queer leaders playing in that?
Yeah, I think like queering our understanding of nature is fundamental because if we're only understanding nature in a very rigid binary lens, we're not allowing the totality of who we are and nature to enter into our discourses and dialogues of well-being and also to nature conservation. If we kind of approach nature conservation in this idea that nature's out there, we need to save it, then it is like not it is a cis-normative colonial mindset. Instead of sort of queering this idea of actually we are nature as well, and we're saving ourselves as well as nature, shifts this understanding.
For sure. Yeah. And I guess there's a lot of trendy language out there using metaphors like growth and transformation and especially in like the corporate world as well, we hear a lot of it, like adaptability and things like that. All things that you've like mentioned are integral to kind of um, nature, biology, and really kind of resonate with the queer experience. Do you have any comments on that? How that language is being used or how it's represented?
I mean, yeah, I do have some thoughts. I think we need to get back to sort of the intention or the purpose of why we're using this language. If it is to um, sort of highlight or prioritize productivity, then that's very different
Yeah.
to prioritizing sort of survival or being. That's all I have to say about that. Unless you have so, yeah, I think that says a lot.
No, but you're right. I mean, we are living in a capitalist society where rest is not um, given really to employees freely. It's something that almost like needs to be demanded now. And you're right, these words around growth and transformation are often kind of almost like little carrots for people to kind of hope that something is going to happen positively, but it is often like to drive more productivity. Um,
Yeah, and I think also understanding exactly what growth and adaptability means, because perhaps when it's used, there's this idea of kind of like pushing through and challenging ourselves constantly. But actually, inherently to growth, there needs to be periods of rest. There needs to be periods of withdrawing, like the natural cycles of nature in the winter, and then the
mm,
summer is growth, and then we go back to the winter where we rest and we hibernate. I'm not sure that in a corporate setting, people are encouraged to hibernate or to rest as often as we should.
yeah. What about, you just mentioned seasons? Are there any kind of connections between queerness and natural cycles like seasons, or I was thinking of like migration patterns as well. That's quite interesting, given you see, heavily migration of queer people from certain you know, territories or countries. Obviously, that's not necessarily nature as you're depicting it, but it's just interesting to think about the way animals also kind of migrate.
I think that's a really good point. And although it applies especially to queer people, it's not only is that immigration, emigration, and moving around the world has always existed and always been a natural part of phenomena, not only human experience, but also birds that migrate, animals that migrate, they move around the planet. It's just a natural part of the way that the ecosystem works. Yeah.
And
So I guess sort of queering our understanding of migration is not something that is kind of not typical or not natural, but understanding that for millennia and all of history, it has always been a natural part of the world.
so we've got a question. Someone's almost kind of shared similar to kind of my story at the start, which is that a lot of queer people, when they're younger, desperate to go to the cities because that's where they're going to connect with community. As people get older, wanting more kind of physical and mental space. And do you think there's a specific correlation between our queerness and a desire to be more in touch with nature as we age?
I think I think when we're younger, there's this transition of belonging and finding ourselves. And that's perhaps primarily finding ourselves in sort of a human population and where we fit. And I suppose then we go to the big city, we do all the things, we we find like-minded people, we find our queerness, or maybe we don't find our queerness. And then perhaps, I don't know, I posit in my experience anyway, I'll talk from my personal experience, is that it gets to this point where I'm like, what is beyond this? What do I belong to that's larger than this? Perhaps this isn't, I have a feeling of belonging, but there's something more to me. And that's where I guess nature connection comes into place, is that we're forced to think differently from a very young age because of our diversity. And I guess that extends to when we move to a city and we start to think, for me anyway, I start to think maybe I'm not just about my social group. Maybe I'm also a citizen of this planet, a person of this planet, and connected to the biosphere and nature.
Do you think it was nature that made you more spiritual, or spirituality that kind of drew you to nature?
Nature that made me more spiritual, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. I think when you're confronted with the vastness and beauty of nature, when you're really able to take it in, it changes something. It really challenges your understanding of things. It really does. It really, even like lying down on a really, I mean, nature also extends to the cosmos. So lying down on a night where the stars are just shining so bright, you feel so small. You're confronted with the mysterious. And I think the mysterious is also something that we're missing from our discourse, because the mysterious isn't easy to grasp in science.
Yeah. Or even just the unexpected or the unpredictability of nature as well. I think that's something that anyone who's done psychedelics may have kind of battled with this idea of surrender. And, I did a month-long ayahuasca retreat in Peru. And that was something for me was very difficult to kind of relinquish the control. And I think nature sometimes requires that of you. And that's the beauty of it. You don't know what you're going to get. And it's certainly when I was younger, as a child, like growing up, I grew up. I've got older siblings, but they'd kind of left home, and so I was kind of like an only child at home. I used to spend hours just like outdoors, and it almost coming back to this idea of seeking community. I think you're right. It's seeking almost this idea of belonging, and it comes back to identity. If we don't see ourselves then represented, then we kind of go looking for that, or we kind of feel isolated. But in nature, when there is no one else to kind of reflect that, we almost kind of can just exist as ourselves. And yeah, that's the beauty there.
Because then I
Um,
guess nature becomes the reflection. Nature's beauty and diversity of forms and colors becomes a reflection of ourselves, of how expansive and intricate we are. And I think what you're raising is a really good point that is also sort of understood in the queer ecological framework, is that the mystery and uncertainty of things also need to be brought more into our day-to-day discourse, because we shy away from it. Nature's mysterious and uncertain.
hmm. And what about movement? Because I feel like the way that we move as humans has like changed over time. We've almost become more and more static. And a lot of the kind of freedom that we see in certain like artistic expressions like dance are reflected in nature as well. And yet, you know, we've almost become these kind of matchstick people walking around. How can kind of movement really enhance our connection to the natural world as well, do you think?
Yeah, so in the West, we've over time prioritized sort of thinking and rationalization as very important, even in the way that we process emotions. We go through to talk therapy, we process things using words in our minds. But I guess the challenge of the challenge that queer ecology brings forward, and also nature connection, is that we can actually process things, and it's important to process things with our bodies as well. Is moving in the natural world and being in the natural world and allowing our feelings to come up, is allowing ourselves to represent animals with our bodies, is allowing ourselves to swim naked in the ocean. These are really, really important ways to process what's going on for us as well. That's bypassing sort of our rational brain.
Lovely. So Neil's put a question. Is there a location you go to both locally and globally that never fails to bring you that sense of awe and connection?
Yeah, two for me is the one I talked about at the start, which I acknowledge I'm very privileged to be able to access, is this place called Point Addis, where I'm from in Victoria, Australia. I guess that's just connected. Number two is my nonna, my grandmother, had this giant fig tree that I would climb and I would sit in, climb to the top and just sit in, and pick and eat the figs, of course, but just sit there. And the fig has become such a symbol for me for safety. And then the third is London. Every single day during winter for the past year and for COVID, I would walk along the canal to Victoria Park and just sit in Victoria Park.
And was that was one of the hikes that you did with us as well? For those that don't know, we do hikes in London. Was that the hike that you did?
Yeah, one of the hikes I did, yeah, I mean, it was incredible. I did a hike with Neil. It wasn't Victoria Park, but we went, what's it called? The other side of the
Oh.
river.
It
What was it now?
was the Thames Path from
The
Putney.
Thames Bar.
Yeah, that's it. For
That was
me,
beautiful.
yeah, you should do that. For me, I think I've mentioned them all already. So there's a field behind my parents' house, which has an amazing like sunset. So love taking the dog there at sunset. Never fails to just bring that sense of awe. Costa Rica, if you haven't been, it's a lifetime trip to be that connected to just the rawness and I mean things are just like degrading there by the minute. Don't take any like leather wallets or anything because they'll just be covered in mold by the end. Which I also love the ephemeral aspect of being there, you know, almost like don't take all your expensive gadgets and things like that because it will just destroy them. And then I'm very fortunate to live in Barcelona, so Neil loves this one as well, like Montserrat. Every time I go there and you look at just the shapes of the mountains, it's like, how can this even exist? It's just incredible that you get to kind of walk up to the top of that viewpoint. It's beautiful.
I
Okay.
think one other quick thing that we haven't mentioned is growing our own food as well is such a powerful way to connect to nature. And it can be simple, it's something as simple as growing herbs in our windowsill. It just connects us to kind of the natural life cycles. It kind of connects us to what we eat and what we put in our body as well. I think that's a really powerful way.
Yeah, I grew up with my parents having like a plot of land that they kind of grew vegetables in, and never appreciated that either, you know, until you move away and you start buying from no shade to Tesco, but like the veggies just don't taste necessarily how they taste when you grow your own. But yeah, and like you said, just being more conscious of what you're consuming, um, and that you start to see that then reflect in all areas of your life, right? It's kind of tending to something, it's being intentional, with kind of the consuming. It's about kind of being able to offer things to other people in exchange and things like that. I remember when, you know, my mum was always gifting these like jars of jam from a damson tree, and then people would give her things in like return. And there's just something kind of community focused as well about growing something or making something for other people.
Yeah, and I think just starting to notice kind of these natural life cycles and seasonality that we have of, when you grow your food, you start to understand that an orange comes into season in the winter, or like a peach comes into season in the summer, and you start to look forward to those fruits, those summer fruits, because you know the sort of ebb and flow of the seasons, this idea of noticing. And then for me, also just the general awe of like you can get this tiny little dot seed, put it in some dirt, and then all of a sudden, like in, weeks, months, whatever, you have this food that you eat. It's just a little dot and it grows. For
Yeah.
me, that's all inspiring.
We need more queer education in schools, and also education around like actual how to grow things practically, right? And how to care for plants for to grow food. I think that's definitely something that was missing from my education. Okay, so we're almost out of time. We managed to fill that well. Great. It was really interesting. Thank you so much. So key takeaways from my side are really just take a breath, slow down, pause, and even if it's just for 30 seconds, enjoy the moment sometimes. I am very guilty of automatically reaching for my phone to take a photo of like the beautiful view, or I've got just a phone full of sunsets, and really, yeah, take a breath, enjoy it. Second one is open yourself up to creativity. So this really speaks to that first point that I made around sometimes when I'm struggling to see things from a different perspective or come up with an idea. Actually, it's not like sitting down and brainstorming when it comes. It's when I go outside and don't think about it that suddenly the ideas come to me. So, really create space for that creativity to appear. And the third one is find green. So that was really around, yeah, noticing consumption. You know, there is no plan B for the planet. So taking care of um, the the planet where you can, but also for me, green is such a powerful color. It relates to like the heart chakra, and something that, you know, I really try to work on myself is around connecting more with my emotions. And so surrounding myself with green is a very powerful way to do that. What are your key takeaways, Santo? Tell me.
Well, there's the awe walk, which I talked about before. There's slowing yourself down and noticing small things, curiosity, feeling connected, a beginner's mindset, and importantly, a sense of playfulness is connected there as well. the more we can sort of approach our lives with a sense of playfulness, the better off we be, I say. I love swimming naked in nature. If anyone gets a chance to do it, then please. In the ocean, in a pool, uh, of course, like taking into mind places where you're allowed to do that. Learning to care for a garden, that's been fundamental for my well-being. Growing your own food, herbs on a windowsill, connecting with nature's cycles and relationships to what you eat. I mentioned this before, curious and playful, childlike state of mind. And most importantly, let's all gather and connect in nature. Let's connect with other queer people. Let's connect together. Natural spaces can be incredibly powerful and healing as a form of embodied resistance.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And we've just got time for anyone who's able to fill out the feedback survey. Neil will pop it in the chat, or it's going to come on a QR maybe. But yeah, we really appreciate your feedback as we're starting to plan our sessions for next year. So if you've got any ideas for topics that you would love to hear about, please do. As I said in the next panel discussion, we're going to be looking at the importance of chosen family as we approach the holidays. For those of you in Barcelona, we've got a couple more events before the end of the year. We've also got another event online in about half an hour, which is our community healing space, a space for dialogue, really looking at navigating emotions post-election. Get in touch if you would like any more information on how we can support you or your business. Otherwise, just have a lovely rest of day, and hopefully we cross paths at some point in the future. That's it, really. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much, Santo. Appreciate you sharing your wisdom, knowledge, and energy with us today.
Thank you, everyone. Absolute pleasure. Find more all.
I'm more, or there we go.